Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. We're celebrating Mississippi, too, which is the show that we're going to have today. We'll get to our guest here in just a second. I wanted to bring your attention to some really fun shows that we've had here on Coast Vue in the past week. One that's notable is the conversation I had with Billy Rubel. I think one of the more popular characters in Gulfport. He'd kill me for saying from Biloxi. And Mac McDonald, who is the executive director for the Mississippi Coast Coliseum, formed an organization called the Second Street Social Club, and they had a Mardi Gras parade coming up, and it's just a great story. If you missed it, you can go to the Facebook page or YouTube channel or your favorite podcast and pull it up. And you'll be glad you did. I mean, it's just a great conversation about how two guys who didn't even know each other moved into a neighborhood, a very resilient neighborhood in Gulfport, 2nd Street, and sort of struck up a conversation. Matt brought his Barnum and Bailey capabilities to the conversation, and Billy Rubel brought his great relationships to the table. They formed this amazing partnership, and they have this great organization now that has done some cool things for 2nd Street. I had a wonderful conversation with Gerard Gibbert, who hosts middays here on SuperTalk. If you missed that, you ought to go take a look at it. It's interesting how along the way our paths crossed. I was involved in some strategic efforts for the parent company for the Sun Herald and commuted to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Miami for a year and a half. For 2 years, and it was a very interesting time. I flew weekly. Did about 650,000 frequent flyer miles during that period of time. And while I was in Philadelphia, Gerard actually was working on a project in Trenton, New Jersey. He would actually fly into Philadelphia. So it's possible we actually passed each other at some point. But the story of the growth of his company and then the ultimate sell of his company and then how he landed in the seat at SuperTalk, it's a really great story. And he brings some great skills to the table. What he knows about entrepreneurship and business, and he's smart as hell. And how he learns about the issues. That was just a great conversation. So I really want to, kind of point your attention to that if you haven't seen that. So without any further ado, let's move over to my friend Michael Watson, the Secretary of State for the state of Mississippi. Someone who a proud coastian that we're really thrilled to have him in a statewide position. Without any further ado, how you doing, my friend?
Man, I'm great. Great to hear you and be with you. And by the way, I heard the Gerard episode. Love his story. It's one of the stories that we like to talk about here when our young folks go off, just like Gerard did. It's okay to come back and start companies and grow and do good things here in Mississippi. So he's got a great story for all Mississippians to really listen to.
It is a great story of entrepreneurship, and it's funny how entrepreneurs often will tell you about serendipitous moments that happened. And he went into the consulting field and about the time the PC was launched, and his career sort of followed the evolution of technology in America, and building this big data center at Jackson State, and how the former Chief Justice Reuben Anderson was involved in that. His company lawyer was Delbert Hoseman. So I mean, it's so interesting, all these dots connect. But anyway, he's a smart guy. I know you've been on his show many times, and we're lucky to have him on the SuperTalk Mississippi team. And he and I share a lot of notes about where we came from and how we landed in this chair. This, Michael, the last place in the world I expected to end up in retirement was sitting in a chair doing a radio show. For goodness sakes,
no joke.
Didn't expect that. Hey, listen, I really got a chuckle from a post that you did. I want to share it with the audience. And first of all, you're a family guy. You have a beautiful family. And one of the posts that you posted, I read it to my wife, Ann, and I just laughed. How old is your daughter who plays t-ball? How old is she?
She's 4, and by the way,
I guess 4. But here it is. So first ball practice. Oh, there she is for the YouTube and Facebook and SuperTalk TV audience. You said after her first at bat and rounding the bases, she walks over and gets back in line. I go over and tell her she did great, and she says, "Dad, I only wanted to try this once. I don't have to do it again, do I?" We're off to a great career. But out of the mouth of babes, buddy, isn't that sweet?
That was great. And I talked her into doing one more round around the bases, and she basically got tired. She said, "Dad, I don't know if I want to do this anymore."
I think that's so sweet. The pictures that you posted were great. Hey, you got to, you and I have shared this before, and we'll actually, on our little list of things to talk about, we'll talk about the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund here in just a little bit. But you had the opportunity to get out into the outdoor, do a little deer hunt, do a little duck hunting. Man, we're lucky to live in the capital of the outdoors in America, aren't we?
It is incredible. And Ricky, you probably saw some of the pictures, just getting to deer hunt with my girls this year. The oldest two have taken to it. They love it, getting excited about it. And we actually had a little 6-point walkout on one of our trips, and I let both of them get them in the scope. But the 6-point in my mind, obviously, was too young and too little to shoot. And so I asked them, so you want to shoot it? And one of them looked at me and said, "Dad, no, I want my first one to be a bigger one." And the guy we were hunting with got mad at us because I didn't let him shoot the deer. But again, as conservationists, that's what we do. It was a young buck, and next year it's going to be even bigger. So we had a great time with that conversation.
We had a fun hunt. My daughter Tori's my daughter Tori's daughter was hunting with her father, Keith Williams Jr. and she's 8. And they were sitting in the stand, and a nice 8-point came out, and she's not shooting yet, but she was with her dad for her first hunt to be on. And he harvested it, and she was excited, and she held the antlers, and it was a big deal. Well, they're sending pictures back to Brody and me, who's 4. He's hunting with me, and we had 12 deer out in front of us, 4 bucks and 4 does in front of us and 8 does all at one time. And he's got his glasses up looking out the window. And I said, "Where are you ready to go see your sister's deer?" And he said, "No, sir." And he was just looking real serious out his binoculars. And he said, I said, let's go see Riley's deer. He said, "No, sir. I want my own deer. I want my own deer. Shoot that doe." I thought that was great, but it was, again, a great opportunity to say, man, we've got all the meat we need. We're big buck hunting now, and it's just a good lesson. And he took it in and got it, and we went over and celebrated and had a fun time. But man, there's nothing more special than to spend time in the outdoors with your kids, is there?
That's exactly right. And really the lessons as conservationists that you can teach, but also just life lessons. Just this weekend, Corbeth and I, the T-ball player, were back behind our house. There's a little creek back there. And just to see her get excited about, "Dad, here are the birds, look at the birds, and the squirrels, look at the squirrels." And, to talk about just outdoors and spending time with your family, nothing better than that.
There is not, and I have the opportunity on SuperTalk Outdoors every Monday to celebrate that, and the people in the department and the people across the state are working in so many different ways to improve our outdoor enjoyment. That's one of the reasons why I'm so absolutely thrilled about having the Stewardship Trust Fund in place now. I know that so many members of your conservation task force, in fact, were just diligent in their lobbying for that, worked over a couple-year period. I joined in with them in a big way, as you well know. Yep. And now we've got this fund. I hope that we can get legislation through that enable us to have a dedicated funding source now, so we don't have to wait for legislative appropriations. I think this is important, actually, Michael, because as we go forward, a lot of the planning that we would do and the federal matching cycles that we will do, it needs to know that there's going to be guaranteed money there next year and the next year. And having to wait for appropriations every year, even though we have commitments from the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor that we will, it's just a clumsy part of the process. I hope we can work through that. But aren't you excited about where we are?
Oh, completely agree with you. And if you saw some of the initial projects on the first applications, if you look at what would be the investment on the state side, as opposed to what you would be drawing down from the federal side, is exactly what we tried to convey to the legislature. This is an opportunity for generational change in Mississippi when it comes to conservation. And so our Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund guys are working hard. I'm proud of them, proud of the work they're doing. We've been to just about every meeting, I think, if not every meeting. So listening in on them, making sure that, look, we want to be a part of this. How do we help drive this process moving forward? Our conservation task force is getting down to the nitty gritty on really starting our overall plan for the entire state. So making a lot of progress there. And it's really fun to see the cohesiveness around the idea itself moving forward, and working with the legislators, working with the Stewardship Trust Fund Board. I'm really excited about it. And as you've mentioned many times before, this is so important for Mississippi moving forward.
Well, Ricky Flint from the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, who's been on my show here, Coast Vue, and also SuperTalk Outdoors many times, is going to be the new executive director. He's hitting the ground running. He's got tremendous experience from the department, many, many years at the department, understands how the dots connect. He'll be terrific in that position. And I'm excited about the board itself. I think we've got some close friends who we know very well who are on that board, and people like Joe Cloyd from the Coast has reported back to me that they're on the case, and they've taken their job extraordinarily seriously because they've had to form the mechanism for this organization that led to the hiring of an executive director. And now they have to, at the same time having these projects flow in that they may or may not fund. It's been a busy time for them as volunteers to be involved in an effort like that. So anyway, when we come back with Mike, let's just make your point here in 1 second. Michael Watson, the Secretary of State. On the other side, we'll continue the conversation about the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to Coast View. We have my friend Michael Watson, who's the Secretary of State for Mississippi. When we went to break, we were talking about the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund and this generational bill. But you were about to make a comment, but we were out of time. What were you going to say, Michael?
Just so much credit to the guys that are on that board. When you think about who makes the board up, who's composed of Colin Maloney and Drew St. John and Van, and we talked about Joe before. These are business folks who are busy, who have things going on. Denny, Terrell. They have things going on, but they're giving of their time to come and make sure that this thing is done and done correctly. Again, just the impact that this is going to have on our state. I just want to say thank you to them publicly for taking the time to do this and do it right.
I agree. I actually refer to this sort of first board as the dream team because they're all they didn't see joining this board as a promotion in life. They're just giving back to the community. They're very successful business people. And they're bringing a business mind to this, and they also love the outdoors. They love, as you wrote recently, sound conservation practices benefit all Mississippians. And as we go forward, putting the kind of conservation projects in place, I mean, literally generational kinds of things, we're going to be where we need to go. I love the fact too that you're still keeping your eyes on the reality that we need a Mississippi conservation plan so that when projects are talked about, they can be seen within the context of some future vision. And you're still locked on that, aren't you?
Absolutely. And again, a great example with these first applications that are coming in. I was talking to the board and said, look, we want to maybe sit down with the director once he is selected. And now that Ricky is, we're going to do this with our conservation task force. And because we can't get that plan in place quickly enough for these first projects, let's just talk about our overall vision of where we need to start and how do we hit these things strategically where we're not just nickel and dime and here and there. We're actually got a plan that's going to change the face of this state when it comes to conservation, when it comes to outdoors for the rest of our lives. And so we're working on that plan. And again, the initial thing is let's get some ideas for them. Which direction do we want to go as a state? And then as we get funding for the planning, we put that together, then it's as simple as, hey, let's hit A first, B second, C, and here we go. So it's going to be really good for the state to have that plan.
It's interesting what you just said. I've said many times about the Coastal Restoration Fund, the BP funds that doesn't have a committee like this that has the power to choose projects with ex officio members of the committee, but instead have to go back to the legislature every year. And what ends up happening is it's become a bit of a political football, and we end up doling out the money in sort of political subdivisions instead of really looking for the big projects. In fact, we've done a little bit better in that regard, but still, we have a chance to get it right. We have a chance to take the spirit of what you just said, should be the spirit of the Stewardship Trust Fund, and apply that same spirit to the Coastal Restoration Fund. Hopefully we're learning from our experiences in all of these things. I know that there has to be improvement in all of this. Listen, elections in Mississippi are important. You have to say grace over elections. Then, of course, you have all these people, these incredible public servants that put their name in the hat into various elected political races that happen all across the state. But the Secretary of State's got a big role in all that, doesn't it?
We do. And Ricky, you may have seen it just yesterday. We finished our last week. I guess now it's actually Valentine's Day. So by the way, happy Valentine's Day to Lauren, my wife, and my three beautiful girls. So just last week, we wrapped up our 82 county tour. meeting with our circuit clerks and our elections commissioners all across Mississippi, clearly 82 counties. There are 410 commissioners. And the idea was, look, elections take a team. And as Mississippians sometimes don't understand, we're very decentralized here, and it's a bottom-up approach. So the really hard work happens at the county level. So your clerks and commissioners, and God bless the folks who work the polls on election days. Those are the ones that really do the hard work. So making sure we've got a good team where we can bounce ideas off of each other, where we can communicate with open lines of communication. Kyle Kirkpatrick in our office does a phenomenal job with elections. So, getting those folks together and building a team is really what makes everything work, but especially elections, when you can talk to each other and have those hard conversations because you have relationships. And I think that's going to be really important moving forward.
At the end of the day, man, I think, you go back to all the chatter about elections, et cetera, and credibility of elections and so on, whether we should nationalize elections. The decentralized approach that we take in America has really served us well, hasn't it?
Look, when you think about just the state as a whole, and different states do different things, and it's a beautiful thing. The laboratories of freedom, or 50 laboratories of freedom, is a great thing. But here in Mississippi, I love our approach. And again, when you can build relationships with these clerks and these commissioners who on the ground every day, as an attorney, you want experts around you. You go find those experts. And when you build those relationships and you have issues like COVID, Ricky, when that came, I was the first time that I was a statewide official, much less a Secretary of State, over elections with COVID in our face in a contentious election. You've got to have a team when things hop up and you face them. Hey, how do we approach this? So having those relationships has been really good. And talking about our process as compared to other states, I love Mississippi's process, this decentralized nature. Again, having elected officials at the local level, those are the ones that Mississippi's need to understand. They answer to you as well. It's not just a Secretary of State's office. And that's one of the things that we've tried to do is educate us on the process here in our state. You need to know who's in charge of voter roll maintenance. You need to know who's in charge of registering voters. You need to know who's in charge of the different pieces of the process. And as we educate Mississippians, they feel more comfortable to engage. And I think you're going to see that moving forward as we continue to do that. It's going to be good for our state.
I think so too. And I have to one more comment. You and I've talked about this before, but when I walk in and sign into the book and have to show my driver's license or some proof of who I am, I don't really have a problem with it. And I haven't seen anyone in the line ever who had a problem with it. It just seems like the thing you should do. I mean, if you use a credit card, you got to show an ID, or if you go to the hospital, you got to show. I just don't understand why there's so much pushback on elections. Do you really understand it?
I don't. It's outlandish. And when you look at Mississippi, and I love to talk about the numbers because people talk about numbers and you and I talk about data. 2020, we just talked about it just a little bit. Record number of turnout here in Mississippi in the face of COVID. And I get there was a contentious election, but still everybody was kind of scared to go vote. Yet we found a way to do it. Not only do it safely. And then you saw the numbers, the turnout. And oh, by the way, when you think about voter ID, and I want people to understand, when this thing passed and it was implemented, if you did not have an ID, we would provide you one. Not only would we provide you with one, we would give you a ride to the circuit clerk's office to get you an ID. Anybody who wants an ID to go vote, we're going to help you get one. And I think we're close to about 10,000 now that we've provided. So it's how we do it. And it makes sense. It gives the voters, the opportunity to say, you know what, my confidence is returning when I know I have to show that ID. So I know who says they're voting is actually the person that is voting.
Well, I was saying you got to use it when you use a credit card. So, to me, the ballot is way more sacred than the credit card. Even though the ramifications of the credit card can be bad. I mean, the reality is you got to use you have to prove who you are in just about every facet of your life, and it just seems that voting would be just sort of a natural extension of that. We'll start this part of the conversation, and we'll certainly carry it over into the other part of the conversation after we get back from break. But I saw where you and I talked about the 82 county tour that you took across Mississippi. We've checked in along the way, but you finally completed it. And it was interesting because if I remember the post, it was sadly you finished it because it's a drudgery to have to get in the car and go do all that. But when you get there and you engage with people, it reminds you that it's cool to be a statewide office holder and have this opportunity to meet with people and listen to them. That's got to be super refreshing to have that opportunity.
Incredible. And you say that the cool piece there, I think the coolest part was kind of the empowerment that you give the circuit clerks and the commissioners, that they know you cared enough. And Rick, again, no slight to any previous Secretary of State, but I was leaving one in Southwest Mississippi, and he said, you'll be able to figure this out. But he said, look, I've been here for 36 years. You're the first Secretary of State to ever cross that threshold. And it just meant so much to me to know that it meant so much to them, that I would take the time to come visit with them and those relationships. And I told them this from the get-go, we're going to have hard conversations. We're not always going to agree. But when you can start those conversations based on a relationship where someone knows that you care enough to come to their office, ask them how you can better serve them, those conversations just go a lot better with that relationship as opposed to, coming out with zero relationship. So it's been so beneficial. And again, when you have those relationships, that's when you can actually move Mississippi forward to have the hard conversations that we have to have.
Hey, it's an interesting thing because there's a cultural piece to this. And I actually know it really well because, like, for example, if I gain responsibility for a newspaper, or let's say I became publisher of a newspaper, newspapers tend to have like offices that are regional, maybe even some in the state capital or whatever. And I would spend a lot of time going out to these offices and meeting the people and whatever. And what I found, though, is that in two cases in particular, and I'm not naming them because it doesn't matter anymore, but in two cases in particular, the publishers that came before me had maybe been in these offices once or maybe never. And suddenly I appear and they assume that something's wrong. And then if I come back again, they really assume something's wrong. I'd be interested to hear sort of what people's reaction to you was, just showing up on the spot and, with there not being sort of a cultural expectation that was the case. We'll see more from Michael Watson, Secretary of State, after this. Welcome back to Coast Vue. We're talking with Michael Watson, the Secretary of State from Mississippi. And when we went to break, we were talking about this 82 county tour that he just completed. If you're on Twitter, you can go to his Twitter page and check out some of the pictures he's posted along the way. But you can tell people are happy to see you, Michael, when you're there, and got a big group of people, various roles in the various counties. I mentioned that when we went to break, though, when I went into a newspaper, and two in particular came to mind for me, when I would actually go out to the hinterland and meet with people in some of the disconnected offices. Some were like giving me an earful. Some were scared to death. They didn't know what, because it's not normal for in the cases that I was in for the publisher to be out there on more than one occasion. How did people react to you? I'm curious about that.
Completely mixed bag, and from one of I could talk about my favorites. One of my favorites was, I think it was down in Wilkinson County, where I don't even think we talked about elections. I don't think we talked about anything. They had a spread of food. They had the local grocery store owner. The mayor was in town, the sheriff, because nobody ever comes to Wilkinson County. And when they had the opportunity to have somebody there, just treated it almost like royalty. And so great. Again, the relationship piece was just so important to me because they all know, he cared enough to come down here to Wilkinson County to visit with us. And you go from that to some home cooked breakfasts with homemade jam and jelly. And, it was just phenomenal. Some you would have really tense conversations with elections commissioners, and they wanted you out of there as quickly as possible. Some would say, hey, why don't you come over to the house for a glass of sweet tea? It was just a great opportunity to see the best of Mississippi. It really was. And,
I love the way you say that. I spent a lot of time in the Mississippi Delta. I love the Delta, but I love Mississippi. I just love Mississippi. But I love the small town feel of Mississippi. I love being in those communities and seeing how much pride there is in those communities and how much dedication there is in those communities to try to do the right thing. And, what's in the heart and soul of Mississippi is you get to see in an 82 county tour, don't you?
Absolutely. And just having the conversations of, look, how did you get to be election commissioner? How did you come to be the circuit clerk? What's your background? What's your story? And just sharing all of us, combined have this innate, desire for the best of Mississippi. We may tend to get there a little bit differently, but having those background conversations and learning what is this person about? And where are they going? How do we get there together? was really just a cool piece of that, to sit down and listen. And I told all of them, this is a listening tour. I'm not coming to tell you how to do your job. I'm coming to ask, how are we doing? And how do I do it better? And once you have that kind of approach to folks, they just open up. We had some folks say, hey, you know what? We had a terrible experience the other day with so-and-so in the office. And I loved it because they felt comfortable enough to say those things in an open and tough conversation, because if we don't have those, then we can't get better. And it's been a lot of fun just to get the feedback from them across the state.
Hey, I mean, one other thing on this point, and we'll shift gears, but you go in and you have those intense conversations, wonderful conversations, you know, the opportunity to visit and get to know people across 82 counties. That's no small undertaking, I might add, because I get what that looks like. When you go back and sit in your office and you say, okay, what's the cumulative learning of what I just experienced? I mean, what's the one or two or three things at the top of your list about what you learned?
Well, it really cements the idea, and I told them this coming into it. You know, as a legislator, I was one of 52 state senators. No one individual can get anything off that floor without building a team, period. And so it kind of cemented the idea of, I don't know everything about elections, and I'll be the first one to admit that. But when I have conversations and relationships with circuit clerks and commissioners who see it day in and day out, and I know I can call them and ask questions, it's just good for Mississippi to have that connection between the state level and the local level. Again, learning that we're all the same. We all want what's best for our families, for our neighbors, for our communities, for the state. Kind of cemented that. And really just the elections process itself. You know, there was just a conversation in Jackson County last week that something I hadn't picked up on in statute that was brought up that made a lot of sense. So the learning of more of the elections process and how they see it as opposed to how the legislators and the state level sees it, really eye-opening, and just reminded me again, I don't know everything. And so making sure that have that open and honest conversation and the ability to tell them, hey, it matters. You know, Ricky, when we got into COVID, really quickly, there was a position that I took that logistically just did not make sense for some of our smaller towns and smaller counties. Well, I had some circuit clerks call and said, hey, we want to come talk to you. And a couple of them that I had visited already, so they knew that I wanted to listen. And for about 45 minutes, they basically told me I was an idiot. You know, as diplomatically as they could, they were very kind. They didn't say I was an idiot. But the idea was that I took from that, you know what, that is not a good idea. I'm gonna backtrack on that. We're not going to do that. The thing that I loved the most about it was they were comfortable enough to come to my office and say, hey, let's think about this a little bit differently. This isn't going to work. So when you have that relationship, when they trust you enough to come tell you you're wrong on this, and you can listen to it and take constructive criticism, that's when it's good for the state.
Whew, I love that, though. That's the way you make progress happen. I really do. I often said about the people who surrounded me that I didn't want yes people. I wanted people who were going to challenge me and who were in some cases on certain subjects way smarter than I am. I wanted that. I want, and if I felt like there was ever a moment when my strengths didn't outweigh my weaknesses, I was going to move on and do something else. But I was willing to put it out there and be vulnerable. You know that, and being elected official, it's actually more rare than not to be willing to be vulnerable, to be willing to accept the feedback, to listen to people. But man, when you do that, whether you're in public life or in a community or working for a company, you're going to have a stronger community. You're going to have a stronger company. You're going to have a stronger state when you listen
Absolutely.
To feedback.
And when I came into office, when we were interviewing all the division heads, whether or not to keep them or move on, one of the things I told them was, look, I don't want yes people. And if I find out that you are, I'll fire you. So I think that's important. You know, when you surround yourself with people who are smart, who care about doing their jobs and doing them correctly, and they see you maybe taking a position that might not be good for the state, might not be good for their division, and they feel the empowerment to come tell you, again, it just makes for a better product at the end of the day, and make sure the Secretary of State's doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Hey, listen, you did a post recently about the Secretary of State ambassadors. But I mean, you're proud of that effort, and it's cool from looking at the video that was posted that, well, first of all, I was surprised how many there were, and the ability to touch so many young people across this state. Man, it gives you a feeling that you're not only making a contribution, but it gives you more confidence that young people that are coming up are really, they intend to make a mark, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. We had 56 high school seniors in our program, in the bachelor program, and three things really quickly. One, how elections work in Mississippi. 2, how does the state government as a whole work in Mississippi? And 3, how do we pour into them to let them know the opportunities that are here? We had our second in-person meeting a couple of weeks ago, and for instance, the lunch speaker was Chevron, and Chevron was telling them the 6-digit figure salaries that you can make right here in Mississippi, and to see their eyes kind of open and not understand that you could actually do that right here at home. That's part of the really fun part for me. But when you have these conversations with these young, bright leaders, and you understand how smart they are, and the hard conversations were the really fun part. That afternoon, I talked to them about race relationships in Mississippi. And when I asked the question, I heard one of them kind of gasp, wow, he's actually asking that. It was one of the best conversations of the whole program. And seeing how they see Mississippi and how we can reshape, if we need to reshape moving forward, what are the things that we need to approach to make you want to come back even more? Those are good conversations. And again, 56 of the best and brightest, and they were sharp. So applications just went out. So if you've got an upcoming high school senior that's a great leader and you want them to get in this program, man, I encourage you to get them to apply as quickly as possible.
What was it? Yeah, again, I think that's a great question to ask. It's an important question to ask, given Mississippi's history and the work that we've worked so hard to do to advance the case for race relations in the state, changing the state flag among them, for a matter of fact. But you look at the picture of the young people that went through it, very diverse, women and men, all seemingly incredibly proud to be there. You cannot lose when you engage young people in the conversation, can you?
No, not at all. And it's funny, like the ones that are in there are in different programs around the state, Trent Light Leadership or whatever it was. And, they'll be in Jackson. And for instance, about 3 or 4 months ago, I was walking back to the office from lunch, and there were 6 or 7 of them that were in the ambassador program, but they were in Jackson for a different reason. I was just waving and yelling, hey, good to see you again. And, got to catch up with them. But those relationships, again, it's about relationships. You know this. And I told every one of them, you spend time getting to know each other, because you 56 are going to be leading this state at some point in time. And you'll remember, hey, remember when we were at the Secretary of State's ambassador program, we got to know each other? That's how you build the future. And letting them know there's opportunity here now, and there will be in the future, and I'm going to help you get there, has been really fun.
Yeah, you don't know in that group, the future governor, the future Secretary of State, it could be an entrepreneurial leader that innovates Mississippi to who knows what. You just never know where that seed being planted, how it's going to grow and how it's going to make a big difference. And I'm all for engaging children, young people in the conversation. Hey, when we come back, we're going to talk about in the final second about efforts in Mississippi to do regulation reform, and frankly, federal government would like to curtail our ability to do reform around regulation. We'll talk about that. And I also wanted to mention my friends from Chapel Hart, the band that's on their own title tour as we speak. So one of my favorite shows I've done on Coast Vue in a long time. We'll continue our conversation with Michael Watson here in just a second. We're visiting with Michael Watson, the Secretary of State from Mississippi. Michael, I wanted to, I mentioned Chapel Hart. You had the opportunity. I saw that you posted a picture of them, and they've actually visited the legislature in the state on a number of occasions. And but what's interesting? I had the opportunity to spend a whole show with them. And what you see with them when you're with them is the way they really are. They are as authentic and pure and talented as everything you see when you're with them. And the show that I did with them has been incredibly well watched. I mean, obviously, shortly after we did the show, their America's Got Talent effort aired. America got introduced to them, but they're songwriters. They're incredibly talented. Their melodies are some of the best I've ever heard. And 3 African-American women doing country music and with no apologies from Poplarville, and talk about the small town, write songs about the small town and about, about independent women. And gosh, I'm so impressed with them. You have to be too, don't you?
Look, we mentioned earlier, the best of Mississippi. Oh my gosh, they encapsulate all of that. Just good people. And as you said, you get around them, you talk to them as authentic as they come. There's, no just preconception of what you would expect from them is, hey, look, these superstars. But you walk up to them and they're just regular Mississippians doing great things. And I told them, thank you for the light that you're shining on our state. And when you see somebody like that, that's authentic, that's talented, from Poplarville, Mississippi, it gives the idea to just the 56 high school seniors we were talking about. Anything is within our reach. You've got star power like that that's showing that light, that's letting other Mississippians know this is possible. We can actually do this. They may not know it, but what they're pouring into the state by their activity, by who they are, by how they respond to people walking up to them, it just gives our future that much brighter of a tint here.
They do a fine job. And one last thing, if people have not heard their music, Chapel Hart, H-A-R-T, Hart, chapel as in go to church, Chapel Hart. Go to Spotify and create a channel for Chapel Hart. They have written some incredible music. When I had only had the opportunity to listen to a few songs prior to having them on, but I had heard enough. I have a musical background, and I told them, I said, man, you guys keep this up. You're going to be major league hits, major league. And now, of course, they're on their own. They're the title band on their tour. And I think it's only up from here and there. And, I say this a lot about Mississippians like that they're ambassadors. You pointed that out. They're ambassadors for Mississippi, and they represent us, and they do so well. And, man, I'm privileged to know them. Hey, listen, we don't have much time left, but you are still focused on deregulation or regulation reform, another way to say it. But that's a big deal, isn't it?
It's huge. And when I tell people about our Tackle the Tape initiative, and it's been written up in Forbes, we got to talk to the White House about it, just a smashing success. And when I tell folks that, look, I'm not anti-regulation, I'm anti-dumb regulation. So if there are things that are hurting small businesses, that are hurting our business climate here in Mississippi, we need to get rid of them. Just a few weeks ago, I had one from Louisville, Mississippi, and a guy was opening a grocery store, and he had run into the USDA. And it was a very simple issue. But the tough part of getting actually through to somebody at USDA, and I'll tell you really quickly, I called him, the director was out, and his assistant emailed me and said, hey, look, here's a phone number for somebody to call. After I told them what the issue was, there was no name, no email address, no, this is who you'll be talking to, no, nothing, just a phone number. And Ricky, I sat there and got really mad and thought, I'm the sitting Secretary of State, and I can't get some help on an issue for a Mississippian. Imagine the burden for a Mississippian trying to call somebody to get an answer. If I can't get an answer, there's no way they're getting a response. So I fired off, before I fired off an email, I erased about 3 of them that were a little bit too hot. Finally sent one off that was kind of diplomatic. Got a response, and it was a different phone number. That's it. So finally, I called our good friend Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith's office and got a correct contact. Within 2 days, it was done. Simple issue, but that's the whole idea and the whole emphasis that we put on regulatory reform. Mississippians need a champion to help them navigate the process or cut the regulations. And so we've been really excited to be that champion, to be, when people hear about Tackle the Tape, to call the Secretary of State's office and know that you've got an advocate that's going to go to work for you. We work for every Mississippian across this state, and it's been really fun and rewarding to see business growth, to see people just, man, I didn't know that this is easy, to get somebody to actually work for me on my behalf to cut these regulations. It's been great.
So Michael, what's important, and as we kind of wind down, what's important though is that when people see the title regulation reform within sort of the construct of a Republican state leader, they immediately think do away with all regulations, hurt the environment. That's not what this is at all. I love the way you say anti-dumb regulation. And when you look at it that way, you can get people, on the federal level engaged in the conversation and really make some change happen, can't you?
That's right. And it takes all of us. It's not just a statewide effort. As you saw, we just put out an op-ed on the regulatory burden at the federal level. So we've got to head on a swivel, look at every angle. Who can we pull in? Call it in, Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith's office. It's not just us, but when we can build that team, that's how you make things happen.
Well, Michael Watson, Secretary of State for Mississippi, I really appreciate you visiting with me. As usual, it was a terrific conversation. I look forward to the next time already. Have a great day and stay in touch, my friend.
Thanks, buddy. Talk to you soon.
It's been a pleasure. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.